as a reminder. So I hope you will all find it useful and in terms of practical tools to apply every day to help resolve our conflict. So can you all see my screen? This is also this phrase of 2021. So Abuna touched upon this a little bit last month, where he talked about our differences that come about and the fact that they are inevitable and that we're different people and how we approach things. So the very first thing to think about conflict is to know that it's inevitable, to know that actually disagreements in marriage, strangely enough, are actually healthy. And one of the things that the marriage counselors told us very early on is that in a marriage, if there are no disagreements, that's a worrying sign to a marriage counselor, because it almost means like the couples, either one or both, have just given up. They just can't be bothered with each other anymore. They can't even be bothered to have that discussion or that debate about differences that they may have. So sometimes we worry as individuals or as couples that having conflict in our marriage might be a bad thing. But one of the things that they shared that's very encouraging is that every couple faces conflict. It's normal. It doesn't mean that we've married the wrong person. It doesn't mean that our marriage is doomed to some type of failure. And as long as we find the right types of tools and techniques to learn how to resolve our differences and our conflict, we can successfully address conflict head on. And the other type of thing is to recognize the types of things that cause us conflict. I feel like COVID is making this worse, and Abuna again spoke about that last month. But the types of things we argue about as couples is, it could be day-to-day simple tasks, taking the garbage out, whatever it is, who's going to do the groceries and line up for 2 hours outside wherever, Walmart, because of the COVID lineups. Our children, we might argue over our parenting techniques. We're cooped up in the house with them quite a bit at the moment, so that may make the arguments worse. We argue over our finances, maybe how much work we're doing, if we're spending enough time together, our physical relationships. So these are all different broad spectrums of things that we argue about. So let's start with knowing that conflict in marriage is okay and it's inevitable and a healthy part of marriage. And now we're going to just start to look at some tools. So these are very, very practical. So we'll go into the first, and Abuna slightly touched upon this as well, I think, last week. So the first tool is to identify our differences and accept our differences. So when we consider how we were all raised in different families, different backgrounds, with different temperaments, different personalities. And so what we don't realize is the way that we were raised has a huge impact in how we are and how we behave in marriage. So I'm going to give examples, and these are hypothetical. Some are real, some are not, but you won't be able to tell. Okay. So hypothetically, I might come from a family who's super quiet, and over the dinner table, we just didn't really talk to one another. We were very invested in eating our food, right? A quiet family. Equally, I might marry somebody like Mina, who comes from a very loud family where when they communicate with one another, it's very expressive. And it may even seem like they're yelling at one another. So I might go to Mina's family and think everybody hates one another because they're screaming across the table. Mina might come to my family dinner and think everybody hates one another because they're not talking to one another. And how that might play into our marriage is, I might not want to talk when I'm having dinner, and Mina might want to talk a lot while having dinner. And we might have a disagreement over how much somebody should talk over dinner. The point of that simple example is just to understand that where we come from inadvertently plays into how we behave in day-to-day life. So one of the first things we can do as a useful tool is to actually identify where we're different. And once we have done that, the key is learning not to change our spouse. And we're going to talk a little bit about the importance of not working to change our spouse a bit later. When we look at our differences, we need to look at them as though we are in a partnership where I might have certain strengths, but I might have certain weaknesses, and Mina is complementary to me in that he has certain strengths and he has certain weaknesses, and we can complement each other by using and leveraging our differences. So marriage is all about teamwork. And one of the verses that we love to use an example for this is from Romans 15, and it says, receive one another just as Christ has also received us. The Greek translation for receive being to accept. So accept one another just as Christ accepted us. So when we start to learn and identify our differences, we can learn to accept them for what they are. And then we can also learn how we can leverage those in a positive way. So I'll give you another quick example. Let's say I'm the spender in the family and Mina's the saver in the family. So let's say early on in our marriage, I would hypothetically go grocery shopping and come back with a lot of expensive items. And Mina would be like, I don't think we really need that $600 vacuum. And I'm like, we really do. You know, the kids leave a lot of mess behind. So Mina might be the one that traditionally is making sure that we save enough money because he's focused on paying the mortgage and paying the bills and a good TFSA or whatever it is, it was account saving for our children. And I might be the one that just wants to live my life and make, you know, when we die, we're not going to take anything with us. So let's just enjoy it and spend it. Now, those two big spectrum of differences could cause a lot of arguments. I might naturally be inclined to think my way is the right way because you've got to live your life. Mina equally might be like, well, if we lived it Mary's way, we would have nothing left at the end of every month. So one of the keys to, again, identifying our differences is instead of trying to make our spouse behave the way we behave, which is the way we think is right, it's about understanding our spouse's difference and how they perceive a particular issue. And then learning how I can get balance through our differences. So for example, in that scenario, it's important to save and set aside money and be cautious and thoughtful about our spending, but it equally is important to live and get to enjoy time with our family, and when COVID is over, maybe go on vacation. So that's kind of the example of how we look at balance. So we're going to put you guys on the spot. You don't have to share. You're all on mute now anyway, so I feel like I'm talking to myself. But we're going to do a series of different exercises. And this first exercise is really about identifying your differences. So you're going to have 5 minutes to do this. Go grab again, those of you that may have joined late, pen and a paper. And you're going to look at these lists of different types of issues. And on this paper, what you're going to do is there's two different spectrums for these issues. And you're going to write down your initials and where you think your spouse sits using their initials on your own without your spouse on the different sides of the spectrum. So for example, money, if I'm the spender, I'm going to put my initials over the word spend. If Mina's the saver, I'm going to put his. You've got 5 minutes to do it. We're going to play some music in the background. And then when you're done, we want you to share it. If we run out of time, we're sorry, we may stop, and then you can carry this on in your own time. So we'll just give you 5 minutes and we're going to time you. Can you guys hear the music?
I count on one thing. The same God that never fails will not fail me now. You won't fail me now in the waiting. The same God who's never late is working all things out. You're working all things out. And yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Oh yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Oh yes, I will. Same God that never fails will not fail me now. You won't fail me now in the waiting. The same God who's never late is working all things out. You're working all things out. Oh yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Your name, oh yes, I
Okay.
One
You were a
second,
little bit
Mary. One sec.
Okay.
Sorry,
Okay,
guys.
we'll let
This
go on
happens-
mute, and we'll
this
let
happens quite
happens
often.
all the time.
Go for it,
We'll
Mike.
we'll let some of you wrap up. And I'm sorry, I know it is very, very little time, and I would encourage you guys, if you don't get a chance to finish it, to carry it over, like maybe after the session or your date nights. This is very good for date nights to keep you guys busy.
Keep you guys fighting even on date night.
Okay.
I think he's writing it down. Maybe we can just send it.
What we
Done.
can do as well, okay, what we can do maybe afterwards is share these slides. And so anybody that wants to write these out and actually look at them can take the time to do that. One of the key things with this particular exercise, and sorry if you didn't quite finish it, is really to just lift up your papers after the fact and have a look at areas where you're really different, where you're opposite ends of a particular spectrum. Because where you see that, and don't worry if you happen to be on opposite ends for almost everything, that's actually very typical for most marriages. We tend to be attracted to somebody that's opposite to us and complements us by their differences. But by seeing those differences, you're going to know that those are going to be the key sources of your disagreement. So the first thing is just to recognize that there's no right or wrong. It's not because Mina's the saver and I'm the spender that my way is necessarily wrong or his way is necessarily wrong. But it's about learning to balance those differences and not try to force our spouse to change to be like us, but more us trying to move to understand our spouse and their differences. Okay, just because of time, I'm going to move on to the next tool. And you're at this point going to think I'm crazy. Okay, so the next tool is called, are you a rhino or are you a hedgehog?
What's your spirit animal?
And I know you're going to think Mary's crazy now. But there are two different types of personalities that handle conflict very differently. And the best way to describe these is the rhino and the hedgehog. So what do these two animals represent in us in how we deal with conflict? So the rhino is the person that immediately after an argument charges forward. We have to discuss this issue right this second. Sit down now. You can't go anywhere until we've thrashed out this issue and we've dealt with it. No, you can't leave. You can't take a minute to yourself. We've got it. We cannot go to sleep until we've addressed this issue. So that rhino personality is someone that is probably a bit more confrontational, has to deal with the issue immediately. The hedgehog, and I love this picture. When I found this picture, I was so happy. This is the hedgehog, okay? The hedgehog is the person that wants to run away from the argument. They want to bury themselves, hide somewhere. I don't want to deal with this right now. I don't want to talk. They might even get in the car and go for a drive to escape this disagreement. They're very different ways of handling conflict, and they each kind of have their own challenges and benefits. One of the problems with the hedgehog is that the hedgehog is that person that can hold resentment in for years. So that's the person that when you get into an argument is like, 10 years ago, you did this. And you're like, how do they remember that I did that 10 years ago? But the hedgehog is very good at that. They can just hold it all in, remember it, and then they just tend to explode with like 10 years worth of pain and resentment. So those are the two different types of ways that we handle disagreements. So you might say, okay, the next exercise we're going to do is figuring out which one we are and which one our spouse
We
is.
find ourselves in the middle. One closer to one than the other.
Yeah, like we might sometimes be a bit of a hedgehog, but we're predominantly a rhino, for example. So it's not to say that there might not be times that we want to run away and hide, but for the most part, we are more one than we are the other. So let's do another quick, I think we're going to do maybe less than 5 minutes, but a quick kind of 2-minute exercise. We'll put our music on. Discuss if based on my description, you are a rhino or a hedgehog and what you think your spouse is. Okay, off you go.
You don't answer all my questions, but you hear me when I speak. You don't keep my heart from breaking, and when it does, you weep with me. You're so close that I can feel you when I've lost the words to pray. And though my eyes have never seen you, I've seen enough to say I know that you are good. I know that you are kind. I know that you are so much more than what I leave behind. I know that I am loved. I know that I am safe. 'Cause even in the fire, to live is Christ, to die is gain. I know that you are good. I don't understand the sorrow, but you're calm within the storm.
Okay, so hopefully you had a couple of minutes to figure out which one you are and which one your spouse is. We don't allow sharing in this forum because we're not here to expose our partners. But one thing I'm going to ask for you guys to do with your little hand buttons is I want you to put your hand button up if you are the opposite or different to your spouse. We're just going to see, give you guys a second to do that. How many hand buttons go up? If we could put our hand button, we're opposites. Looks like we got Michael and Randy. So you don't have to tell us what you are. A couple of hands going up.
Okay, Michael, Randy.
Michael and Randy, Mira. So a few hands. Wow, a lot of you are, it appears quite similar. Or you're very slow to your hand button, one or the other.
And in case you're looking for the hand button, just in case those who aren't familiar, if you move to the banner of the screen, be it on the top or the bottom, you'll find a button called Reactions. And if you click on that, you'll see the options there to raise a hand or clap or...
Thanks, Abuna. You've become very tech savvy in the COVID time. So historically, what we found is that the majority of couples have married someone that is the opposite. And I think we did this session in a marriage course where there were 20 couples and 19 out of 20 were opposites. And that was actually for 7 years, that was pretty consistent. So it's pretty encouraging to know that it's normal that we handle our conflict differently and we have different ways of resolving it. The key, though, with figuring out if we're a rhino or a hedgehog is about understanding what the other person needs. So I'm a hedgehog. I'll openly admit that I'm a hedgehog and I prefer to run away from the disagreements. So what I need as a hedgehog is I need my spouse to recognize that in the heat of an argument, the best thing for me is to be able to retreat. It doesn't have to be for days or weeks or months. Hedgehogs are very bad at that. We can play the silent game for weeks on end. But I need to retreat for maybe even just 5 or 10 minutes. I need to gather my thoughts and gather my emotions and come back to the discussion in more of a measured way. And I know as a hedgehog, I can do that if I'm given that space. So that's important for me. What's important for my spouse, who might be more the rhino character, is that I need to recognize that I do at some point as a hedgehog have to discuss this. I can't just pretend the disagreement didn't happen. I can't pretend that it's all just going to stop the following day. I need to learn how to resolve it and how to come to have that discussion. So again, very much like how we talked about the two differences, the difference in the spectrums that we have for different issues. It's kind of about like coming together and finding ways where I can move a little bit and my spouse can move a little bit so that we can find better ways of resolving that or having that discussion or resolving that disagreement. Does that make sense? You can nod or put your hand up if it does. Okay, so the next tool is actually one of my favorites because it's so easy to do and there should be really no excuse for any of us to not be able to do this tool. It is to express appreciation for one another. And this is something that we really don't do very well in marriage, especially when we've been married for a long time. I think back to my engagement days or my early marriage days, and I thought the world of Mina. I still think the world of Mina, but I was probably much better at expressing how much I appreciated him and everything that he did for me and the person that he is early on in our marriage. So no marriage can really survive day to day if there's a lack of respect, if there's a lack of positive, affirming words spoken to one another. And we all need encouragement to feel appreciated. And some people think this is just something that women need, but actually that's not true. Men also need to feel respected and valued and appreciated. That's really important for men too. So the key for expressing appreciation is to really make it a habit, to try to do it daily. Got a picture of a post-it note. You could put post-it notes up, leave messages for your spouse, send text messages to say how you appreciate them. And the key to this is really building up our spouse and expressing gratitude to them, not only for the things they do, but also for who they are, remembering why you married them in the first place, what drew you to your partner, what you loved about them when you first met them. And this is something we really have to make as a daily discipline, a daily habit. So now I'm going to force you to do that. So you're going to have 5 minutes and you have to write 6, that's right, 6 things that you appreciate about your spouse. You have to be specific. You could be thanking them for things they do or who they are. You can mix it up a little bit. But we also want you to really think about things that you may have taken for granted in your spouse. This is probably very relevant during COVID times. When you finish, we want you to share your list with one another and absorb all that positive affirmation that you're getting from your spouse. So you've got about 3 or 4 minutes we'll give you to do that. This is the last exercise, so really give it your all.
Oh, I have days to lose the fight. Try my best, but just don't get it right. Where I talk a talk that I don't walk and miss the moments right before my eyes. Somebody with a hurt that I could have helped, somebody with a hand that I could have held. When I just can't see past myself, Lord, help me be a little more like mercy, a little more like grace, a little more like kindness, goodness, love and faith, a little more like patience, a little more like peace, a little more like Jesus, a little less like me. Yeah, there's no denying I have changed. I've been set from who I used to be. But even at my best, I must confess I still need help to see the way you see. Somebody with a hurt that I could have helped, somebody with a hand that I could have held. When I just can't see past myself, Lord, help me be a little more like mercy, a little more like grace, a little more like kindness, goodness, love and faith, a little more like patience, a little more like peace, a little more like Jesus, a little less like me. Oh, to be the beggar on the street, love to be your hands and feet, freely give what I receive, Lord, help me be. I wanna put you first above all else, love my neighbor as myself, in the moments no one sees, Lord, help me be. 1, 2, a little more like mercy, a little more like grace.
Okay, hopefully you're all feeling appreciated after that exercise. And we really hope that this is like, we just did it too. I'm not joking when I say we did this course for 7 years and we can still find new and different things, especially with COVID going on, to be grateful and to thank our partner for things that they do that we really appreciate. Okay, So the next tool we're going to talk about is one of my favorites, the art of a healthy discussion. Or Mina's married to me, I'm a lawyer, so you could call it debate, argument, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of those in our household. So what is this? What tool is this? This is all about finding little techniques so that when we have a disagreement or a discussion, that we have it in a really healthy way. So one of the first things that the marriage counselors recommend is that you find a good time to have your argument or your discussion. And what that means is they have suggested something called a 10 o'clock rule. And that is, if you start an argument before 10 o'clock, you've got to stop it at 10 o'clock. And you cannot start an argument after 10 o'clock. And why do they suggest this unique rule? It's because typically at the end of the night, we're exhausted and we might be less patient with our spouse. We might be more easily agitated by our spouse. And typically we may even just like exaggerate our emotions at that time of night. And the strangest thing has happened to us where Mina implements the 10 o'clock rule very often, and we stop our argument and I go to sleep and I wake up the following day and I'm like, I don't even know why I was so upset about that, or I don't even remember what we were arguing about. And that opportunity to just have a good night's sleep and approach the discussion well rested and not exhausted has been really, really positive for our marriage. So we implement that 10 o'clock rule and we love it and recommend it. And the other thing that the marriage counselors suggest is also find the right place. So if you're at I know with COVID these days we're cooped up at home, but if you're at your in-laws or you're at Costco, these are not good locations to have a healthy discussion or argument, whatever you want to call it. Those are not the right locations. So it takes a lot of discipline and self-control, but you really need to think, is this the right place? Am I in the right location? Is this the right time for us to be having this discussion? So that's really key. The other thing is to actually identify the issue that you are arguing about. And this sounds so simple, but is so practical. We can often get into disagreements and arguments with our partner, and we start somewhere, and at the very end, we're like on a completely different topic. Like I may have started arguing about the kitchen towel usage and that there's too much usage going on and I prefer to preserve it. And at the end, I might be arguing about something completely different. So one of the key things that we really need to do is focus on what is the real issue that we're arguing or debating about, and identify that issue to try to stop the escalation of it becoming, something completely different. Some other tips that they recommend is try to discuss the issue that's at hand rather than attacking one another. So try to avoid using expressions like, you never do this, or I always do that. So not to stereotype, but men are very logical. So when a woman says, I always cook the dinners, the man will remember the one time in the last 12 months that he has cooked the dinner, and he will call you out on it. So it's better not to use expressions like I always or you never, because it's probably not true. Like maybe most of the time, the majority of the time I might cook the dinners, but let's try not to label one another with making our partner feel like they never do something or you always do something. The other thing is that when we talk, we should express ourselves using I statements like, I feel. So I feel underappreciated when, or I feel sad when, and it diminishes the argument into something where you're really just expressing how you feel, because sometimes it's more of the other partner might perceive something different to how you feel. So it's important to be able to express how you feel and kind of present that in the right way. The other thing to do, Zoom, is you could use a tool. I've got my wooden spoon here. I'm going to stereotype again, but Egyptians have a terrible habit of interrupting one another. And very often, if I'm having an argument with my spouse, I might be midway through my point before my husband starts to talk. And I'm like, I'm not finished yet. My spouse says, but I thought you were finished. So this is crazy, but a useful tool that I can hold my, whatever it is, in this case, a wooden spoon, to say my point, to make my point. And when I'm done, I pass it over to my spouse, who's the best, and he would have his turn to share his emotions. This actually randomly does actually stop interruptions, which can be very frustrating during an argument. The other solution that they gave, which I really loved, is to create a mind map of the problem. And I don't know if Zoom, like, if I don't know if you guys, can you see that? I know you're looking at my screen, probably you might have to, can you see my little mind map? Okay, so this is a hypothetical example of one of the things that the marriage counselors suggested. So let's take an issue. In my particular instance, let's pretend that I don't spend enough time with Mina and he gets really upset with that. So what the counselors suggested is you create a mind map, you make sure you identify the real issue, you put that in the center. And then you come up with all of the different possible solutions together as a couple as to how you might resolve this problem. And they can be as crazy as you want. And there's a reason for that. And I'll explain it in a second. So here are some of my solutions to my problem. So I could quit my job. So now I have all the time in the world to be available for my spouse. I could get a babysitter more frequently. I know during COVID that's a challenge, but I could get a babysitter to spend some time with my kids. So I could spend time with my husband. I could work part-time. I could have my spouse just accept that I don't have that much time for them, but maybe it would be, less time, but more quality time. I could give my kids up for adoption. It's probably a challenging one, but I could do that. Or I could find someone to help me around the house who could do some chores. Now you're going to say, Mary, why did you you're never going to give your kids up for adoption. Why is that an option on your mind map? Well, the reason that it's there is that the counselors suggest that you do this because it really brings home the challenge that the person in the middle is facing. If you don't put all the crazy ideas down, the person that has the issue, so let's say in this example, like Mina has the issue with me, when he sees that I have all these challenges, I have children to deal with, I have a household to deal with, I have a job to deal with, it's going to make him a bit more reasonable in how he approaches the solution, right? And we might look at this mind map and say, well, it's not really realistic to give our kids up for adoption. It's not realistic for Mary to quit her job. So she's going to get a babysitter and get someone to help around the house so that we can have more quality time. We might resolve it by coming up with those two options as a solution. But the crazy stuff is kind of important too, because it just allows the person that's complaining about the issue to have more of a measured approach, to really see the challenges for what they are, and that we have to hone in on what's a reasonable solution. Okay, so that's just not necessarily a real example. The other thing is that it's okay if you come back to that mind map in the future. Like if you find that you're continuing to argue about the same issue over and over again, you can come back to this, you can keep the piece of paper, you can actually try to come up with new ideas and keep going back until you try to find something that kind of works for you as a couple or you as a family. Okay, the next tool is learning to grow together. So a lot of couples in modern day and age, certainly those that are not Christian, after having a very challenging relationship, maybe being married for quite some time, they might just be like, you know what, we're just incompatible. We just don't work together. And the problem with that is that's typically when couples have reached the point where they just don't want to try anymore and they don't want to look at how they can change. And one of the challenges we have as humans is that we are, by our nature, very self-centered. We often think about ourselves, what we want, how we feel happy. I need this, I need that. You're not doing enough for me on this particular thing. And one of the most successful things that helps us to resolve our conflict is to look at how we can change ourselves and not change our spouse, because we can never, ever change our spouse. And that is probably one of the worst things we could come into a marriage thinking that we can do. But we can change ourselves. We can ask our partner what matters to them, what do they care about, what frustrates them, what hurts them. And then we can recognize that if I try to change or I try to improve how I approach something, then my effort, and if my partner equally makes the same effort, allows us to come together and to resolve our differences. So requesting change is helpful if your partner says, I really struggle with this, and is asking you to be open to changing something, but demanding change is harmful. So we should never be demanding that our spouse changes. And one of the verses that we pulled out as a good example for this is from Matthew 7. and says, why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not consider the plank in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me remove the speck from your eye, and look, the plank is still in your own eye? And this is just a really good verse to represent the need for us to be examining ourselves and looking to what we're not doing very well, where we could change to make things better for our spouse. And the more that we do that, the better we can be at resolving our differences and our conflict. Okay. The next tool is called the spiral of unrealistic expectations. And there's a little diagram here that shows that when we have certain expectations of things, this can spiral out of control into something that becomes a demand, and then we get disappointed, and then we start to blame our spouse. And this is a real life example I'm going to share with you of something that happened early on in our marriage before we had kiddos. I used to work as a lawyer and had very, very long hours at a law firm in the city of London. And I remember having one really bad day. My clients were yelling at me, they were fighting, I was working till late into the night. It was just a horrible day. And early on in our marriage, I called Mina and I was very upset. I said, I had a really difficult day. It was really rough. And could you pick me up from the train station? I just want you to know I had a bad day. And he was like, yes, of course, Mary, I'll pick you up. He showed up at the train station. I'm sitting on the train, they're long rides in London. And so I had a good 40 minutes to think. And I'm like, I bet he's going to show up with like a bunch of roses because I told him I had a bad day. He knows that it was horrible. He's going to do something. There's going to be a gesture of some kind, like balloons or something. There's going to be this lovely thing that he's going to do to cheer me up. So I showed up. He was there at the train station, so he did good. But I got in the car and there were no roses and there was no chocolates. And there was just nothing. There was nothing that I had concocted in my head. And that led to my spiral of being very upset. I told you I had a bad day. You should have understood that that meant you were meant to do something about it and do some nice gesture. And then I was disappointed in him. And then I was blaming him, like, you could have been a better husband if you realized I had a bad day and you did this. So that's like maybe a silly example that we use like early on in our marriage, but the truth is that can apply to anything. Anytime we have an expectation that our spouse is going to do something, and women are not great at this, we don't communicate what our expectation is. It's very likely that our spouse, they're not mind readers. They don't know what's going on in our head. They're very likely not to do what it is that we're expecting. And so that can lead to this pretty nasty spiral where we just kind of get out of control because we set a certain expectation. So it's pretty good to keep our expectations pretty low because then they're typically, hopefully, meeting them or exceeding them.
Communicate them, not
and to communicate them too. And the other key as well is to remember that our spouse is not the one that is there to meet all our needs. So a lot of people enter into marriage and they think, I'm going to get married and I'm going to have a companion and that person is just going to meet all of my needs. And that just isn't the case. So we are still human, we are still weak, we still have sins, and we still struggle. So that leads us into the next tool. That the next tool is that God is the only one who can meet all of our needs. And I don't know if you can see the screen here. This is one of my favorite kind of images to be able to really put this tool into practice. When you look at this triangle, if the wife were to focus on God and the husband were to focus on God, and they each focused on God at the top of that triangle, the distance between the husband and the wife gets shorter and shorter and shorter as they get closer to God. So when they're far from God at the bottom ends of the triangle, they're far from each other. As they draw closer to God individually, and they can actually meet at the top right there. So as their relationship with God is strong, the relationship between them is strong. So it's a really simple image, but it reminds us that we need to first ensure that our relationship with God is strong. As we do that, God equips us to help us change ourselves. He equips us to recognize our own weaknesses. He equips us to deal with our own failures, our own weaknesses, and to help us to be better people for our spouses. So rather than looking at our spouse to fulfill all our needs and solve all our problems, we should be looking to God, to developing a closer relationship with God. And that will help the relationship that we have with our spouse. And one of the verses to illustrate this image is from Ecclesiastes, and says, though one may be overpowered by another, two can withstand him, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken. So we want our marriage to be between us, but God, and our focus to always be on God. Okay, the last and final tool, which is such a simple tool, and ever since I had kids, seems like the most difficult tool for me to apply, is to spend time as a couple praying together. This is, again, a simple and easy tool for us to put into practice every day. It helps us to connect in a meaningful way. If at the end of every night you said to your spouse, you just took 5 minutes to say, what can I pray for you for tonight? Within a couple of minutes, you would already know all of the things that are weighing on their shoulders, that are making them feel stressed or concerned or worried, because as they express to you what they want you to pray for them about, you're going to realize what all the issues are, the things that they're thinking about. So it's a great way to not only better understand what your spouse is worried about, but to be able to pray for them on those issues. The other thing to do is to make sure your prayers are not manipulative. So it's not an opportunity to say, please God, my spouse is a really messy person, and I pray that you would just help them, because I'm stuck in COVID times in a house I can't get out. The government says I stay at home order, and so I need you to help my spouse be cleaner. Like, whatever it is, like, our prayers shouldn't be manipulative. They shouldn't be about what we want God to fix in the other person. That's not how we successfully pray for one another. It really should be, as I said, about asking them what they're concerned about and praying for God to help them with those issues, or praying about issues you may be facing as a couple. And it's better to do that, even if you can only find 5 minutes every day or even week to do it. It's better than only doing it for an hour, let's say, every month. Like, short and frequent is better than not getting around to it and doing it kind of once a year. And you need to be willing to accept the same requests from your partner. Your partner may be worried about job security or whatever it is, and that's a particular issue that keeps coming up over and over again. So be willing to continue to be diligent and faithful in praying for that particular issue, even if it's for a long period of time. Take the time to read your Bible together and to meditate on verses together. And when you start your prayer, start it with thankfulness, to thank God for what he has given you and your spouse, for all that you have and your children. Don't let, and I say this to myself before I say it to anybody else, but don't let children be a distraction or a deterrent to taking the time to find those 5 minutes to pray with one another. It is so easy to let our kids kind of deviate us from taking that time. And as we said in the triangle image, the closer we get to God, the closer we become to our spouse. And if we have had an argument, the best thing we can do is to apologize, to say sorry before we take that time to pray. And if you have to, plan your prayer in, like you would plan in your work, into your schedules, set aside a time so you get a reminder to take the time to do that. It's a great way to really come together as a couple and to try to resolve any of the challenges that you're facing. So that's the end. And I think we finished like 2 minutes early. So